Hello everyone. In today's oral history project, we're very honored to have Mr. Michael Lintern-Smith to be our honorable guest. My name is Marcus Ng. I'm very lucky, honestly, very lucky to have you as our interviewee. I know you are a former president of the Law Society of Hong Kong during 2004 and 2005.
Yep.
You joined Robinsons in 1981. You practiced in Hong Kong for nearly 40 years. You are a past member of the Judicial Officers Recommendation Commission.
Correct.
And you also previously on the High Court and CFA Rules Committee. So your recognition and your appointments goes a long way. There's a long list of that. But I guess many audience, just like myself, a young lawyer, we really want to know more about you personally and hear from you how your successful story. So without further ado, welcome again, and shall we get on to the questions?
Sure, let's do that.
Right. So what motivated you to pursue a career in law? I understand that you have practiced in Paris for 7 years before moving to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us more about it?
Sure. I think the reason I wanted to become a lawyer is that as a young man I thought, well, it's a job which has prestige, it's a job at which you should be able to make some money, but above all, it's a job where you can help people. And it really is a job which has a very, very personal touch. And if you're good with dealing with people, then generally you will become a rather decent lawyer. I went to Paris because that was the time that Britain was joining the European Union in the 1970s. And everyone talked about having a specialization. So I went and I studied and joined a firm there. Starting at very, very basic level, but eventually staying for 7 years. It was the time at which there was a large influx of British capital into buying properties in Paris, so I was involved in that. Had a large repertoire, a lot of different types of cases to do. And then after about 7 years, I thought to myself, well, the one thing that I can't do in France is advocacy. And so I thought, all right, I'll do something different or go somewhere different where I will have the chance of doing all the commercial work which I've already learned how to do, but I will also have a chance of doing some kind of advocacy. And I looked for other jurisdictions. I thought, having been in France for 7 years is a good time to learn the culture, understand the people, learn the language. And so I thought, okay, Hong Kong has English law. Very few restrictions on setting up. You could be admitted to the court in Hong Kong simply on the basis of your English qualification. And so I moved to Hong Kong. And that was in 1981, as you said earlier.
1981. So how was the legal professional like in 1980s? You mentioned that. I'm assuming that must be a very booming economy and also for the industry as well.
Yeah, there were far fewer lawyers in 1980 than there are today. And it was less polarized between barristers and solicitors. I think it was more mixed up. A lot more advocacy cases were done by solicitors in the district court as well as the magistrates court. These days, those type of cases tend to be briefed out to barristers. So there were a lot fewer. I think my first registration number was something 800 and something, only with 3 digits. You know, it was a booming time, but it always has been booming in Hong Kong. But a lot of people, I remember mixing with people who I met right at the beginning and they're saying, well, you know, the good times are over for Hong Kong. We've had the development through plastic flowers and the small industry and becoming a garment production center, and maybe you've come at the wrong time and we are thinking of leaving. So anyway, they were wrong and I was right. So I stayed and I very much enjoyed being in the legal profession for 40 years in Hong Kong, yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about your practice in Hong Kong? I know that you're a leader in litigation, commercial law, and administrative law. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
It's been very varied, and the benefits of joining a small firm is that I've had the ability to work in many areas, and probably at an earlier age and with slightly less experience than if I'd joined one of the larger firms in town. So I wouldn't say that I have specialized in anything. Yes, there are some areas in which I very much enjoy doing. I've done a lot of administrative law, enjoyed being involved in fights with government departments. The anti-money laundering thing is a little bit more recent, but it's something which I still very much enjoy doing. But in the early days, I was in court 4 days out of 5, and I enjoyed the advocacy side of it. So rather than ask me what kind of law I've done, it's probably better to say, what kind of law have you never done? And honestly, I've been involved in just about everything. 95% of the type of work that a lawyer would expect to come across in Hong Kong, I think I've been involved in those type of cases.
Right. As opposed to the recent legal market where people talk about a specialization. Like for myself, I do corporate law. So when I look up to senior lawyers like yourself, I know, or you are the real lawyers as I imagine. And I'm more like doing the transactional work, a very limited kind of work, and I don't know much about court or litigations. And thank you so much for sharing about that.
Yep.
So moving on to my next questions, I would really want to know what aspects of being a lawyer do you find most fulfilling and what is the reason? And added on top of that, what are some of the most memorable matters that you've worked on?
I think it's what I said earlier, you get to deal with people. I never want to be a barrister because a barrister only gets to see part of the case. Solicitors have direct involvement with the client right from the beginning, make choices which are very, very important in the case. But also you have the opportunity of handling contracts, drafting contracts, doing memoranda, and all kinds of corporate transactions. So that was the attraction, I think, that I had a chance to do more types of things, which is the opposite of what I thought I would be doing. As I said earlier, I went to Paris. I thought I'd be doing European law. But that was something which I didn't need to follow in Hong Kong. There was no opportunity to do that. What kind of cases am I being involved with mostly? Well, I did a lot of cases reviewing government decisions, particularly the aviation department, on behalf of the Cathay Pilots Association, the HKAOA, who were very, I wouldn't say litigious, but they were very principled, and if mistakes were made by the Civil Aviation Department, they wanted to have them judicially reviewed, and I was involved in that. I was also involved in the inquiry. This has an aviation connection as well. The one and only fatal accident at Chek Lap Kok airport, which I think was probably around about the year 2002. And it was a China Airlines aircraft which flipped. I think 4 people were killed in the accident. And because there were a lot of pressures involved, because the airport was new. And the government didn't really want to have any fault found about the position of the airport or the operation of the airport. And you get to see in something like that all of the other interests. I mean, China Airlines, they had lawyers present and they were pushing to make sure that their interests were protected, as were Boeing, because it was a Boeing airplane. And I was representing the pilot all the way through, who was getting close to his retirement age. He couldn't understand the way that he saw it was that he had actually managed to save 300 lives,
Right.
As opposed to 4 people losing their lives. Interesting case. Still haven't seen the report which comes out from the government. Hasn't been done yet.
Right. Apart from your representation, you previously mentioned that you entered the law career because you also you're fond of helping people. You like the opportunity to influence people, to bring good deeds to society.
Yeah.
And in fact, you've been really involved in public services. You have involved in the work of the Law Society and served as a council member for many, many years. So what really prompted you to involve in that work and of the Law Society?
Yeah, I think I was a council member of the Law Society for 22 and a half years, which I don't think has been surpassed. It may be, but that's probably the longest so far. I joined a committee I was interested in the early days. There was a committee which was set up to assist solicitors which had problems and used to meet on an ad hoc basis, had no fixed timetable for its meetings. And I joined that because I thought that was helping people, because solicitors who had problems came to that committee and we tried to help them. As a result of that, I was asked by the then Secretary General, who was Patrick Moss, whether I would join another committee, and I did join one of the standing committees, and then I found that interesting and varied work as well. And so eventually I put my name forward for election to the council. I think at very first I was co-opted when it was Roderick Wu who was president at the time. Then I stood for election and then remained there for another 22 years. It is administrative law, and it's interesting to see how an organization operates and the administration which is involved. The Law Society here is complex. We are our own regulator. In England and Wales now there is an external regulator. So the Law Society's role is restricted to promoting the interests of its members, which in Hong Kong we regulate and we also promote the interests. And then very, very unusually, we also have the role of being our insurer to a statutory scheme which is called, as you know, the Solicitor's Indemnity Fund. And why I got involved and why I became president, it was around the time that there had been a large call on funds after there was a lot of conveyancing cases where mistakes had been made by solicitors, and I think starting about 1998. And then also one of the reinsurers under the scheme, which was an Australian company, had gone bankrupt. And the Law Society was required to make a call, I think in the year 2000, on its members. So it's a fund, it's owned by the members, and they were required to put their hands in their pocket and make an extraordinary contribution to satisfy all of the claims. That led, of course, to a lot of solicitors thinking, well, why do we need to continue to operate a mutual? Shouldn't we just put out insurance to the private market? Which was debated and talked about a lot. And it got to the point where a notice of motion was laid by some of the members against 5 of the council members, which included the then president. And I, as vice president, was obliged to chair the meeting, where we had some fairly angry members who were really very much in favour of going to the private market for insurance. One of the things I did, which I'm still proud of, was I got in touch with the English Law Society, and they had only just recently put their insurance out to the private market. And as a result of that, a lot of solicitors who had claims were no longer able to get insurance, and they found it to be far more expensive. So we had a vote on the issue, and we decided that we would retain the mutual. It's a statutory scheme anyway. We would have had to have gone to LegCo to change it. But we decided to retain the mutual, and now it has a huge surplus in that fund. In excess of $1 billion. And because it's a statutory scheme, we cannot pay the money back to the members. So what the Law Society does most years, it tries to reduce the amount of the contribution which is required. And so I think, looking back, that was probably one of the things that I did right.
I understand you have experienced the work of the anti-money laundering.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about the development of Hong Kong's anti-money laundering regime over the years?
It's a very, very complex area. It's the only committee that I remain on in the Law Society. I chair the Anti-Money Laundering Committee. And there's legislation which goes back to the 1990s, when the government at that time was worried about Hong Kong being used as a source for passing money through the banks, which was the proceeds of really the first concern was drug money, and then organized crime money, triad money. And that's why we have it in the legislation, the early embodiment of the anti-money laundering requirements. But Hong Kong is a member of the FATF, I call it. It's the Action Task Force, Financial Action Task Force, which is a subsidiary of the OECD in Paris. And they send around members to audit each other's jurisdictions. And we've done 2 in the time that I've been involved with the Anti-Money Laundering Committee. And I've twice worked closely with FATF when they did visits to Hong Kong. One of those, I believe, was 2010, if I'm correct. And again, they were in 2018, and we had a further report. But like everything in money laundering, it's continuous assessment. And the rules are becoming more and more complex, to the extent that it's now necessary under the most recent legislation, which was passed last year, came into force on the 1st of June. It's now going to be necessary for every firm to do a self-assessment of its risks and decide which areas are risky for it. And it's also necessary for the Law Society to do a risk assessment, which we're undertaking at the moment, getting feedback from members. But that is something which was going to take a lot of work. It's a new area, and we have now a department of 2 persons, and soon to be 3, within the Law Society, working on those issues all of the time. What I have resisted on behalf of the profession, because I believe that most lawyers are clever and they know the law on the subject and they can understand, unlike other professions, say, such as estate agents, or what I've believed is that it should not be necessary for us to go and do inspections. But it's becoming very, very difficult to resist that. And there is an intention soon that we will be asking the Council of the Law Society to approve a system whereby we have trained experts in money laundering who can go and offer the services, paid for by the Law Society, but they will offer their services to the firms to make sure that they have a regime in place to make sure that they are assessing the risk of taking on new clients. But also, as you probably know, we have to continue to do that assessment year after year and make sure that the clients that we're dealing with are not suspect, and the funds which we're handling are not the proceeds of any indictable offence.
Just now you talk about your achievements, the things that you've done in your capacity as the Law Society president.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there any goal or objective that you, when you run the campaign, you wanted to do, but you couldn't have finished within your office, but you really want to see it being put into practice in the late?
Oh, there are many things which I wanted to do, which I think these days are just not going to be possible, like reform of legal aid. You know, we have a very wealthy government, and yet legal aid is restricted to very, very few people. And I remember I gave a speech at the opening of the legal year, and I did want to get involved in that, but I can see there will be government resistance forever on that. I was quite proud of what I did with regard to the insurance of it, as I've said, but you know, I only stayed for 1 year as president, even though most people wanted me to stay longer. But there were very, very capable people in the Law Society Council who had also been there for a long time. And I thought it was fair that the president should rotate very quickly. There are some people who have been on the council now for approaching 20 years and are nowhere near becoming president. But I think that if you have a calling for acting on behalf of the Law Society, that you should have the opportunity at some point of being the president, because to be the leading figure is quite an honour, to be the head of the profession, and it's something which you will carry for the rest of your career. I think also more recently there have been changes in the constitution of the members, and We've had successive years now where we tend to have presidents for 3 years. I still think it's best that it should be rotated on 1 year. I think the best thing in an organization is that the president stays in office. He has the assistance of his predecessor to help him, and then he moves over to be the immediate past president, offers his assistant to the new incoming president, and that they rotate quickly. I think that's the best way of organizing it. Unfortunately, other people see it slightly differently, and it continues as it is. But I was wrong anyway in my assessment, because I thought I would only stay for 1 year having been president, and I in fact stayed for another 15 or 16 years. So it was the pleasure of being involved, and the pleasure, as I say, of being able to help people, members of the Law Society in particular, but members of the public also. So I enjoyed that very much.
I understand that during your presidency there was also attempts to penetrate the Chinese mainland market, the CEPA. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, CEPA, we did reach agreement with the authorities in China for CEPA, which meant you could have partnerships between Hong Kong firms and Chinese mainland firms. It wasn't just for lawyers, it was for just about every author. And CEPA did have some impact initially, but not so strong as it turned out. I think what is going to have a much bigger impact is the Greater Bay Area. And what they're doing now is hopefully going to be very, very useful for Hong Kong. I mean, I think the Chinese government has been very, very kind in saying that Hong Kong will continue as a judicial, financial, administrative centre where all of the services are involved, and it's up to Hong Kong people in the professions, not just the legal profession, to seize that opportunity. And you know, we now have a hinterland of 80 million people across in Guangdong province, and we should be able to move into that market and really stamp our authority on it. I know that the exam is already in place. You can do the Greater Bay Area exam, or maybe you can do it. I can't because it's not in English, but I probably would do if I spoke better Chinese. But it's the future, and I think that it's up to Hong Kong people to seize that opportunity and make sure that it's not just Hong Kong, it's the whole of the Greater Bay Area, which is playing a part in our practice.
Apart from the Chinese or Cantonese capability, what were your other biggest challenges in the legal professional group?
Dealing with government has usually been awkward, mostly because I introduced some changes so that we could do what's called a group practice. That was relatively easy. Then I worked on the working party to update and modernize solicitors' accounts rules. That proved to be very, very difficult and taught me a big lesson about trying to start again. I mean, those rules, if you look at them, they don't make a great deal of sense, and they're not really in a logical order. You can see that they've just been added to and added to over the years. And of course, the other one was the limited liability partnerships. And we did eventually get limited liability partnerships for Hong Kong, but in a form which is not particularly beneficial. Not as beneficial as it is in other jurisdictions. And the irony about all of this is that legislation was actually passed, I believe, in 1996, it might have been 97, which allowed solicitors' firms to set up corporations. So you didn't have to operate as a partnership or a limited liability partnership. You could set up a company. And ever since that was passed, which is now more than 25 years, the government, Law Society, various bodies, LegCo, have been formulating the rules for implementing that. That's not very good. It shouldn't take, if legislation is passed, it should be implemented and the rules worked out within 18 months or so, and that change made. But that is one which has just dragged on and on and on. And there are other pieces of legislation which have dragged on and on. particularly in the conveyancing world. You probably know that there's a whole new legislation for registration of title in Hong Kong, which had pros and cons. But anyway, that has still not been implemented, even though the legislation was passed about more than 20 years ago.
We heard from you about the future of Hong Kong lawyers in the Greater Bay Area.
Yep.
What particular role do you see Hong Kong lawyers can play in the National Economic Development Plan in relation to the National 14th Five-Year Plan and the recent development in the Greater Bay Area, as you mentioned just now?
That I don't know. I am not really qualified to be answering questions on how we get involved in the 5-year plan. It's just a bit too much of the Greater China area for me. For the Greater Bay Area, yes, I can see into that area and can see Hong Kong lawyers playing a large part. Internationally as well. But I do think that firms who are moving into Shanghai and Beijing face a lot of competition from lawyers who are already there. The training, the language expertise of lawyers who practice in Beijing and in Shanghai, and presumably in other cities which I've not visited, is impressive. And they could be stiff competition for Hong Kong lawyers, which is why I would like to see them concentrating on their own backyard. After all, it's the same language, it's Cantonese, and it's the same ancestry, so I think they're better off dealing with GBA.
That brings me to my next question, is that what are your hopes for the next generation of Hong Kong lawyers, for the future of Hong Kong legal professional, and maybe for Hong Kong in a larger sense?
It's tougher because there's more competition, but there are more lawyers registered, more than 10,000 solicitors registered, although not all of them have practicing certificates, and a lot of them who are practicing in-house. It is going to become tougher. We do face competition from Singapore, where the legal system is supported financially by the government, and they have their own commercial court, and they have an arbitration centre which is supported by the government, which is not the case in Hong Kong. There are other areas and it's not even going to be able to predict them from this point in time. I mean, AI is coming into the profession. It's going to have an effect on us, and we're all going to have to be trained in that. But I think probably I won't get involved with that. I've done my time, and I don't think I'm really going to be able to cope with the changes in the future. I just hope that the government puts all of the effort necessary into making sure that Hong Kong remains an international dispute resolution centre, which means I'm spending money on more judges, getting the best facilities. There are plans for a new High Court building, but that seems to have stumbled and doesn't seem to be moving forward. I know that where the site is, and I see it every day when I try. But we need the government to have a strong will to maintain Hong Kong as a dispute resolution centre, but also as an administration centre for lawyers, so that we can deal with insurance law, investment law, financial services law, all of those things. And we do need strong support from the government on that.
Thank you, Mr. Michael Lintern-Smith, for joining us today at the Oral History Project. We have a small token of appreciation to present to you, to thank you for this precious interview.
Thank you. That is very kind. Very cute also, thank you. But it's been a pleasure to be able to participate. Thank you for inviting me.